I want to thank our sponsor, Planet Ford. Planet Ford has always been a proud supporter of law enforcement in the community, providing customer service and fleet management, sales, and service. If you're looking for that personal quality service, contact Planet Ford in Spring or online at planetford.com. You're listening to Crime Scene Today, where we discuss current and future issues facing law enforcement, forensics, and crime scene investigation. I'm your host, Dan Zentek. Today's broadcast will be discussing details of violent acts. Listener discretion is advised. So joining me today, we have our regular co-host, fatality fire. The fire marshal works it, and if we find out that it's related to a homicide, then the homicide division gets involved. And this is a case that definitely, as we start going through, you realize both definitely need to be involved in doing this because there are so many different expertise in the forensic field of fire investigation versus normal crime scene investigation that really are unique to one another. So Kevin, thank you for coming in, and I also want to recognize that there's three of us sitting here that were involved in this case.
Absolutely.
There were a lot of people involved in this case, and I had done a quick run through just to acknowledge them and show that our patrol division had two people that responded in reference to this. There were 7 people from the detective division, there were 7 people from the crime lab, and there were 6 people from the fire marshal. So there was a large team that was involved in this case. We're just representatives from a much larger group that were involved in this. So to sort of start us off, we're talking about the murder of Michael Gloede, but it did not start as a murder, that at least as far as we knew. So the date is February 2nd. It's after midnight, and Kevin, you sort of walk us through. It just comes in as an arson call or a fire, I guess. So how'd that come about?
Yeah, so typically with Montgomery County Fire Marshal's Office, we investigate any structure fire within Montgomery County. And so it's not uncommon for us to get notified after hours of a fire. Very early on during the fire department's suppression of the fire, we learned that they found a victim inside the structure where the fire had occurred. When that happens, we send an investigator immediately out to the scene. Darren Hess with our office responded to the scene and started the investigation. He worked cooperatively with the fire department to make sure that we preserved as much evidence as possible and started processing that scene. And
now, you remember how y'all got the call on it? Like, with a witness had seen it. I want to say it was like a truck driver or something. I think it was a neighbor.
I think it was a neighbor. I'm kind of.
I think it was. I think midnight was his normal shift. Like, he was getting
Right.
up to go somewhere, and he saw it wasn't fully involved. I mean, it was just a flicker. So he thought something was odd. There was a fire over there. Initially, it called it in.
Right.
So I guess that's how this first came in. Now, when the fire department goes, did they always call y'all first, or it's like because they found the body, they call y'all?
So once they discovered the body in the fire is when they called us. Usually when they get on scene, they have a lot of stuff going on. They have to get the fire under control, kind of try to figure out what they have. They do what they call a primary search when they're initially starting to fight the fire. They're looking to see if there's any victims inside the residence that can be rescued. During the fire suppression and their primary search, they discovered Michael Gloede within the structure. We weren't able to confirm that at the time, but we did find the body.
Right, and I mean that brings up another point. I mean, I say most, but certainly the victims of these fires, they're not recognizable. There's other things we have to do to confirm. I mean, we believe. I mean, it's most likely that when we go to one of these, that the person who lived there is the person that we believe is probably the person that died. But we can't say that. I mean, without a doubt.
Right.
So we have to do the DNA, dental records, those type of things, and other things to do that. So now, I know something unique to y'all's office that we don't really get involved in is collecting stuff for accelerants and things like. So how do you determine whether an accelerant's used, not used? What's sort of the process that normal or otherwise?
So normally when an investigator first starts looking at a fire scene, they will go in and start looking at fire patterns that are present on the outside of the structure, the inside of the structure. We work in a systematic manner, going from the least amount of damage to the most significant. And then once we kind of get there, we look at the patterns and see if they're abnormal or if there's something that would indicate that there might be the presence of an accelerant. Our best tool that we utilize is an accelerant detection canine. We've had, through the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, we've had an accelerant canine within our office for over 20 years now. During my time there, we've had a span of 4 or 5 dogs. They've been a great asset because they are specifically trained on common accelerants that would be used in a fire, and they can pinpoint where our best sample would be taken.
So now y'all also collect, I guess, material and stuff. Is it, I guess, where the dog hits, then you collect from that area, or?
So typically when the dog, we call an alert. When the dog alerts, either the canine handler will collect the evidence in a metal can, or he'll dictate that to someone else to go collect that evidence. They'll go in, collect it in a metal can so that it's sealed, because they're called what we call a volatile chemical. So if we just let it sit in a normal bag or something like that, those chemicals are going to off-gas, like gasoline or other types of fuels that we would commonly find in a fire. So they're sealed in that, and they're sent off to the state lab for processing.
So what's the procedure? I mean, obviously it's in the can. What do they do at the lab with it? Is it like other chemical processing?
So the process they use is it goes through a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, GCMS more commonly known as. The technique that they utilize is called heated headspace. So they'll heat up the can, and they'll collect the vapor level at the top of the can in that heated headspace, and then that will go run through the GCMS. All chemicals have a specific signature when they go through a GCMS, and then the scientist who's working on that at the lab will be able to say whether they have gasoline or kerosene or some other type of ignitable liquid.
So now, does this just say what it is, or can it say like the concentration of it? Is that part of it, or no?
No, it's specifically just identifying whether you have like a gasoline or other families of
Okay.
accelerants.
So your part in this case, did you go you didn't go that night to the scene?
I did not.
So you headed the next day to the autopsy.
Right. So first thing that morning, I went to the forensic center and met with Dr. Vesey. Joe Mance from our office was also there, and Dr. Vesey started the process by taking X-rays of the body.
So what came out of that switched it from y'all working it to notifying the sheriff's department that we had a homicide?
Right. So as you mentioned earlier, we generally work most fire fatalities, unless something suspicious comes up. During the process of X-raying the body, when we took X-rays of the head, Dr. Vesey discovered that there was what appeared to be 2 bullets within the head, and so he processed that a little bit further. Once we determined that they were actually bullets, we reached out to the sheriff's department, majors as it was called during the time,
right.
and the crime lab, and said, hey, this is going to be a homicide, and so that's when we started the process of working together.
So at this point, things start breaking up into different teams, different tasks, and so we have the crime lab heading to the scene, and then the detectives are starting to look into, obviously, the why someone would have killed him, right? So I remember going to the crime scene, and it was one of the first fire scenes that I had dug.
Me as well.
And so this is where we give y'all great kudos, because unlike our crime scenes that are still fully standing and up, and you can identify things such as couches and walls and other things, that doesn't exist in your crime scenes. Now, to you, after you've seen these things over and over, that was a chair, that was a couch. And that's why I certainly encourage, if you have one of these scenes, if you work in this field, to bring those two entities together, because
Absolutely.
You see something totally different than we see. At this point, we just look like chimney sweeps gathering a lot of coal
Right.
into where the baskets with I would call them strainers, but you know what I'm talking about, that we would
Sifting screens.
the sifting screen that we would shuffle through trying to find the one casing or the whatever. So again, it's a totally different process. We spend a lot of time. It smells a lot more than some of the other scenes that we've been on. So again, y'all do that on a regular basis, and we thank you so much for doing that.
Right.
So we don't. But so the next thing we had was we had to again find out why, right? I mean, that's where every homicide starts: is who would want to kill this person. So one thing that really stuck in my head as far as this case is we had a call slip. So I'm going back, any previous calls that happened at this address, and the call slip comes up, and it says it's our decedent. It's Michael Fred Gloede that's calling in and saying that pretty much everybody in the neighborhood, there's 20 to 30 people outside of his house that want to kill him and burn his house. Okay, so that's where we start. Basically, the suspect is the whole neighborhood. Right. Everyone would like him dead. So that's a real great place that we start on this, right? Now, then we start looking at next of kin, one for notification purposes and also for their insight into, how do we get, to who would want to kill them. And one thing I've always said as far as working these murder cases, they're usually not difficult just in the sense that normally a lot of our murders is someone who has such an emotional rage or attachment. You can track down, it's limited
Right.
to the amount of people that want to do that. It's very rare that you have your serial killers with no connection, those type of things, right?
Right.
So, we go and find out that his son, his next of kin, as it is he was currently in jail. And so I go to interview Michael Brandon Gloede, his father being Michael Fred, and in talking with him, he was surprised and said that the only person he could really think whatsoever that may have wanted to harm his father, and he didn't really say harm his father, he just knows one person who was regularly going to his house, was a person that named Mary, okay? So that was really the only connection we had of a person. Now, to stop there for a moment, because as I said, I interviewed him at the jail. So this plays into a different factor that sort of brings around why he's in jail and another connection to Michael Fred Gloede. So a little bit about this neighborhood, and it's sort of very unique as far as this particular crime or just in general as far as this investigation. It's very rare that the area that we're looking at, that the witnesses, the suspect, the co-defendants, all the evidence, everything involved is probably within like less than a square mile, right? And that's exactly what happened in this particular case. And for those that have YouTube or Facebook, where we do have the video and some pictures on there. For those listening, when you enter the neighborhood, it basically is one road entering, and it sort of makes a circle. So there's only about 3 roads in this neighborhood, and nearby is a lake. But in this neighborhood, Michael Fred Gloede, where the fire occurred, is on one end of the street, and just down the other end of the street is where another individual lived named Lori Randall. Lori Randall had a husband and 3 children, and during the course of her life, she started getting involved in drugs. And she ended up separating from her husband and leaving her children, and whether out of fear, need, not sure, she started dating her drug dealer. And during the course of dating him, and she had expressed to some friends that she was afraid of leaving him, that he would harm her, these type of things. But in 2006, and it was March of 2006, there was an incident in which Lori Randall was assaulted by Michael Brandon Gloede. And the detectives in that particular case had gotten a call from the hospital stating that Lori's injuries were severe, her pupils were fixed and dilated, that they did not believe she would be recovering from this injury. Again, the injury occurred and I want to say it was in April. Either way, it was 2006. And a few days later, Lori was taken off of life support, and she died. Now, again, that was 2006. It took until 2008 before Michael Fred and Michael Brandon were indicted for the death of Lori Randall. Now, I'm not sure, I don't have the conversations between the detectives and the DA on why they decided on manslaughter versus murder. I don't know what the particulars were in that. I just know that there were many witnesses who identified a lot of bruising to face, shoulders, and arms and previous incidents. In this particular case, apparently there was Michael Brandon had shaken Lori and hit her in the head. They had taken her into the house that in this case burnt and stayed there and did not offer assistance, medical help, or whatever till it got too late is sort of my understanding of it. But again, that was 2008. In 2009 is when the trial happens, in which Michael Brandon, the son, is either found guilty or pleads guilty. Either way, he gets 10 years. But Michael Fred, in November of 2009, the cases are dismissed against him because of insufficient evidence. So he is off for the charge. So that's sort of where that is as far as history. They live down the road, and so that's why Michael Brandon is in jail right now. So the next, I guess, real break in the case that we get, which is between a witness comes forward. So, and it's the same person that Michael Brandon had mentioned. He said that Mary kept going in the house. Well, Mary comes forward, and we did a canvass of the neighborhood. We're talking to everybody, and so Mary comes forward, and she says that a young girl who is 15, who we're going to refer to as Jennifer, and to understand as we're telling this story, any witnesses, any juveniles, any people, we've changed their names. The only people that are truly identified are our suspects and the defendants that are adults. But so Jennifer had come by Mary's house, and she told Mary that her and Keith, which is Lori Randall's middle son, had murdered Michael Gloede. And I remember the thing that really stood out that was strange is that Mary talked very quickly, and she gave details. So I mean, she's telling us how they entered, what they had, where they sat, the conversation, where they moved to, all these different things, to the point that, and I can't remember, Kevin, if you were part of the initial interview on that or if you had watched it, but to the point that after we were done, every experienced investigator looked at each other and said, she was involved, right?
Yes.
She has too many details. This does not occur as far as how much she knows, right? But she actually wasn't, as it comes out later. But at that point, it led us to start looking at Jennifer and at Keith, okay? Keith, again, is the middle son involved in this. And Keith has no criminal record. The only criminal record that Keith had is he got a DWI. The day he got the DWI is the exact day that charges were dismissed against Michael Fred Gloede. Basically, the day that the court dismissed the charge against him, he went out, had some drinks, drove when he shouldn't, got caught, gets a DWI. So that's his only criminal history whatsoever. We then go and grab both of them, and I know that Kevin and I got to sit down and talk with Jennifer. We took her to the fire marshal's office with her mom. Her mom was present for the whole thing. And Scale, why don't you sort of express her attitude, her general demeanor that we dealt with?
You know, it was just one of those situations where,
I mean, she pretty much, when she was telling the story, didn't care. I mean, that's another way to put it, right? I mean, you may as well have been talking about any other day of the week.
right. It was just very factual, very matter of fact, very, you know, it's just, hey, we did it. This is what we did. You know, so it was.
Her mom was more emotional than she was.
Right.
I mean, I remember you and I talking later and saying that as Jennifer is telling the story, her mom looks like someone's punching her in the stomach.
Right.
I mean, she's the one who's actually taking on this emotion or whatever. And so, and I think part of that, and we'll discuss even in punishment stuff later, but remember I talked about those 20 or 30 people that wanted to kill this person, right? So if you think about Jennifer, we're now at 2010, and that happened in 2006. So pretty much all her life between, 10 and 15, she's been told that this guy's a piece of trash and that he should be killed and that he killed
Right.
Lori and these type of things, right? It nearly, I mean, once they were saying the developmental years has been told, his life is worth nothing.
Right.
And another thing that sort of caught me on this was we had another witness that we had interviewed, and she said that, so she's walking with Jennifer, and they're passing by Keith's house, and there's like a little lake next to Keith's house. Not really a lake. It's like a little, I don't know, retention pond, if you
Right.
even call it that, right? And so they're walking by that, and Keith calls Jennifer over, and Heather, her friend, is with her. She doesn't walk over with, but we talked to Heather later, and this is what Heather tells us: says that Keith calls Jennifer over, and when Jennifer comes back, says, "So what did Keith want?" "Oh, he wants me to help him kill Michael Gloede." And she said, "Okay." And then they went to the house to watch a movie. I mean, this was like a normal
Right.
conversation, right? Like,
Right.
no different than someone saying, "Hey, let's." He wanted to go to a movie later or something. I mean,
Right.
there was no emotion involved. It was just like, "Oh, okay,"
Yeah. Very, well, like you said, it's kind of like it was entrained in that whole neighborhood that this guy was just a bad person, and that's kind of how their attitudes all turned out towards it.
Right.
So with that and sort of walking through, now once we had Keith, now Keith did not immediately tell us what happened. Keith didn't talk about the crime. I can't remember his lie up front. Okay, all I know is it was a lie. He had told us something until he knew that we had Jennifer. Literally as soon as we told him we have Jennifer, that was it. And he told us the whole thing.
And that's a kind of a common experience with a lot of people, at least from on my side, if usually they get that lie up front until you can kind of show them that you have the rest of the story, and that's usually.
I pretty much have found on nearly all confessions, you getting a confession is dependent on them believing that you already know.
Right.
If they believe you already know the answer, they're willing to tell you the answer.
Right.
Even if you don't know the answer yet. But anyway, so the sort of the walkthrough, and this is why it was so crazy, because it was, and that was the other thing that stood out. Remember, I talked about Mary and how detailed she was about Jennifer's story. But then when we met Jennifer, we knew why. Because if we thought Mary was detailed, Jennifer is 20 times more.
Absolutely.
Okay? And it was very much listening to a teenager. Everything was, oh, and like we did this, and like this was happening, and then like this, and I mean, it was just again a typical teenage conversation, except we were talking about murder,
Right.
right? And so So here's the story between both of them as far as what happened and then where our next things led. So one thing we never were able to confirm, I say confirm, we know that 2 weeks prior on the school bus, Keith was asking about getting a gun. Now, he never admitted that he got the gun for the purpose to kill Michael Gloede. He just said he wanted a gun. We never could get him to admit that. But he did get a gun. He did walk by the lake. He had involved Jennifer in this plan. And the thought or the reason behind that was that Jennifer, I guess, still had some type, I don't want to say relationship, that's probably not the most appropriate word for Michael Gloede, but she would go over there. I don't know why.
Right.
We've never linked whether she got drugs, whether it's just a friendship, don't know. But she obviously was able to talk to him, and there was a conversation that supposedly had come up that Michael Fred Gloede did not want Keith mad at him about his mother. He wanted to convince him or explain to him that he was not responsible for his mom's death and did not want him to continue to be upset with him. Right. So that sort of opened the door because Jennifer basically said, well, I can make the meeting happen, right? Okay, so she reached out to Michael Fred and said, hey, Keith would like to meet with you, okay? And so that's what was going to happen. Now, there's no doubt they knew this was not just a meeting, that what was about to happen, because Jennifer sneaks out the house after her mom goes to work, meets Keith. Literally, they live, again, the whole neighborhood thing. They live a couple of houses from one another, walks down there. Keith already has a can of gas. He has the gun. They then walk to Michael Fred's house, and they enter, and Michael Fred has a big Akita dog. Okay, those things are huge, right? So
the dog ended up being a big part of the case.
It did. And so the dog, probably sensing something was up, I would imagine, is not real fond of the kids coming in the house. And so he's steadily barking, being aggressive, to the point that Michael Fred ties him to the couch. And so they're sitting on, I think it was like a bed in the living room, and Michael Fred is sitting on a couch. And at one point during their conversation, and immediately, again, going off of their statements, as soon as they walked in, Michael Fred offered them some OxyContin with the same casual as I would offer you a Coke or Sprite if you came to my house, right? So they refused that. He was big into buying jewelry online. Now, not like jewelry set, but like stones, right? So he had the stones and things like that he would buy. And so he was very proud of these. He was showing those off and stuff. Well, anyway, somewhere during the conversation, Keith excuses himself to go to the bathroom. As he's coming back, so he's walking down the hall, and it's a trailer. So think of a trailer, sort of I can't remember if it was a double wide or single.
It was single. Yeah,
so
small.
So small trailer. He was heading down the hall, which basically was walking straight to the back of the couch, which had Michael Fred. Then Jennifer was sitting on the bed across from him, and Keith had motioned to Jennifer to move out of the way, okay, to move a little bit to the left or right. So when she does, that sort of cues Michael Fred, but at that time, Keith already has a gun out and starts shooting Michael Fred in the back of the head.
Right.
So he now shoots him. They now have a dog to deal with, okay, and he brought the gas. And so he throws some gas on just the steps out front and tries to light that, and apparently it doesn't work very well.
Right.
So he then pours the rest in the house, and we end up with him burning the house, burn the dog, and he never shot the dog. He just let the dog burn.
Right.
And so that left one issue that we had to deal with, which we never had before, and that is we have a dog as part of the crime scene that we don't know if it has bullets.
Right.
We don't know
What
what.
the fire department had buried the dog.
Right.
Yes, because they were,
On the
I
initial
guess,
scene. Yeah.
being kind or something.
Right, and it's not an uncommon thing for them to do.
Sure.
If somebody has a pet lost in a fire, a lot of fire departments will bury it for them just out of courtesy.
Right.
So, you
So
know,
they did, and we had to go retrieve
Right.
the dog.
the dog, which then we had to send the dog away because you can't take a dog to a human forensic center, or you shouldn't. We'll just leave it at that. It should not end up at the regular forensic center. It needs to go for a necropsy. We have Texas A&M here that does it. In an upcoming show, we're going to talk about the SPCA just started a new forensic science center for animal cruelty out of Florida, and they're going to come on and talk about all the different things. Basically, it would have been a place that you would have sent this
Right.
dog, right? But prior to them burning, they steal a gun from the house. Not just the one they used to
Right.
shoot him with, but they steal another gun, and they steal some jewelry. And then after leaving, they sort of go through the woods and cut back, and they sort of split their take. Each one takes some jewelry, and they head their separate ways. So that's their story, and that then leads Kevin and I to writing search warrants that then Les will have to go and process.
Yes.
So, so with those search warrants, the first thing we're looking for is obviously the stuff taken. So there's a couple places we go. One, we go to the juvenile's house, Jennifer, and Jennifer also said in her statement that during the time that Keith had approached her about getting some of the jewelry, wanted some of what they took, and after, I know, going to her house, it was in the closet that we found, I don't know, there were bags, there was boxes, there was, and they were all like loose stones things. So that was there, and all the jewelry that we knew of that had been taken was there. But what we also found is that he had sold some of it. So we found out where he had sold some of the jewelry, and that was what I guess he had asked for, what he had wanted. And another detective that we have, Detective Eason, had gone to I can't remember, I think it was a jewelry store. I don't think it was a pawn shop.
I think it was a jewelry store.
So went to the jewelry store and had gotten money for this, right?
Right.
So now the one thing that really stood out, so then we run a search warrant on Keith's house. And obviously we're looking for the gun, right?
Right.
The one that he stole or the murder
One,
weapon.
yep.
Either one would be great. So we go there, but the one thing that really stood out in doing Keith's house is when you entered his bedroom. So on his wall in the bedroom, he had news clippings of his mom's murder, and had a picture of her on the wall, and had the news article in which charges were dismissed and these type of things. So obviously this had been on his wall along with her obituary ever since the murder. Okay, so that was sort of telling of how much this. I mean, obviously we always miss someone that's gone, but this is
was
on his
living
mind.
with it
right?
daily.
He's
Right.
living with it, and the person possibly responsible lives right down the road, literally a couple of houses down.
A daily
right?
reminder.
Right.
So that was going on there. We were able to, in talking with him, to find out he had actually taken the gun that he stole, and he took it to an aunt's house, which had like a shed on their
That's where I
property.
remember it was found back there.
So we went to the shed. The family was less than cooperative with us going there, but we did find in the shed, we found the gun that, not the murder weapon, but the gun that he had stolen from Michael Gloede, which leads us to the bigger part that Les had to deal with, and that is, so we talked to one of his friends named Adam. And Adam is the one who took him to the jewelry store. And Adam also told us about a lake nearby. And the lake, he said that there was a stump. And he like stood on the stump and he threw the gun out as far as he could. So again, the lake is right by this neighborhood. Again, everything is close by in this case. But that led to us needing to recover this gun, which we do not have or did not have a dive team capable of doing that. So we call our Houston Police Department. So you want to explain that process of the lake and the recovery?
Sure. So we contacted HPD and made contact with their dive team, explained the circumstances, what we had in dealing with the murder and the possible disposal of the murder weapon into the lake. And they came out and kind of surveyed the area, figure out what they're dealing with, and then set up the day for them to come out and search. So we were out there, and like you said, according to the statement, he had stood on the step and threw it into the lake like a Frisbee. So we at least had a general sense of where they needed to search and about how far out they needed to go. So they did their normal process. And
actually, it's pretty neat. 'Cause, I mean, they have communication. So even though they're underwater, they're still communicating with people on shore. They can't see anything.
No,
I mean,
it's very murky.
We don't live in Cancun or anywhere, right? I mean, so it's by all means, you're not seeing anything more than an inch in front of your face. So literally think about just sand, silt type of bottom of a lake, and you're pretty much just crawling and feeling every inch of everything.
And making the water even murkier because
you're stirring it all up, right?
Yeah.
So that's what they do, and sort of in a line method of just going through and trying to find the area.
Right. And the danger that goes with that of knowing that they're searching for a firearm that has the potential of being loaded at the time that it was thrown in.
Now, I do remember a side story of this. We had found one other gun in there prior to this. But we had pulled out. It was a water gun.
Yes.
Plastic. Now it got recovered the same exact way.
It did.
They thought they had it. They were putting it in the canister. Everything, brought it up. We finally get it up. No, that's not it. Go back down.
Rather disappointing.
But they were able to recover the gun.
They were.
So now they had put it in a container with the water. You want to explain that?
Yeah. So when we've got a weapon. Generally, there are obviously metal components to the firearm. So when you introduce metal into a wet environment and you remove it from the wet environment, it has the potential of rusting and relatively quickly. So when that occurs, when we've got a firearm or something, a metal object that we need to recover from water, the best practice is to take a container down. Once they are able to locate an object that they're going to bring to the surface, they're going to take a container with them, use the same water, the body of water that is there, fill the container with the water, put the object in that container, and then bring it up to the surface. So as long as, if it is a firearm or another metal object that is intended on being recovered, as long as it stays submerged, it's not going to rust. As soon as it's brought into the air or into a regular environment is when that rust process begins. So in order to preserve it the best we can, we collect it into a container of the same body of water.
So now then what happens to the gun? Like after you got it, I mean, obviously we're going to test it. We have bullets from the autopsy that we want to compare. Did it come from this? So what's our next process after it hits our container, right?
So once we have it documented at the scene as best we can in the murky water that's now in the container, it will come back to the crime lab, and at that point we'll remove it from the water and start a kind of a cleansing process to retard the rust process. Once we get that to a stable state, then we actually ended up submitting it to the state lab. We arranged that we ended up driving it to Austin, which was where it needed to be submitted. And so we let them know what we had, what the circumstances of the offense were, took the firearms evidence that was collected from autopsy, as well as the firearm that was collected from the lake, and allowed them to do their analysis of it.
So now they ended up getting a match.
They did.
So the gun actually matched the bullets recovered from
Yes.
Michael Fred. So in this case so far, we now have witnesses that they've confessed to. They've confessed to us, which those confessions led to new evidence that we didn't have,
Right.
which was the jewelry, the gun in the shed. And so we're tying everything very solid in this case. And the end result, both were pled. This never went to trial. Both pled. Keith got 35 years. Jennifer got 15 years. Now, I'll tell you a couple of sad processes of this. So I remember in interviewing Keith, and after he had left, he made the comment. He says, "I know what I did was wrong, and I'll do my 5 years or so, and I'll get on with life." And I really think he believed that because what he had witnessed with his mom was that the person got 10 years for manslaughter, which you have to do half your time, right? So it means 5 years.
Right.
He's looking at getting out. And he certainly could not correlate anything he did different than the person that killed his mom.
Right.
So I know at no point was he thinking of 35 years. And I think this, when you look at the dates, I mean, he really, it still doesn't make it right, but he waited. I mean, he waited from 2006 until 2009 for someone to to find Michael Fred guilty of killing his mom, and there's insufficient evidence. Now, again, that's why it's not right, because the court basically said he didn't. So did he kill an innocent person? Obviously in his mind, no. He felt that he was involved in his mom's murder. He waited until 2009. It was 3 months before this. So 3 months before he gets his DWI. After that, at no point did we ever get him to confess to saying he'd been planning this for 3 months, right? But obviously there was planning within the first couple weeks before this. Now, the next process was the juvenile with Jennifer. So the way Texas law works, she was 15 at the time, but if you commit a crime as a juvenile, there's a hearing once you turn 18, and that decides whether or not you will continue to serve out your sentence as an adult in Texas Department of Corrections, or whether they feel that you have rehabbed, you've done enough, and you get to be released.
Right.
One of the biggest factors that they determine that on is your remorse and your growth. And I remember sitting at the hearing for this purpose, and they spoke about how she had no remorse. And obviously, I guess, I don't know what all happens behind juvenile detention of counselors and different things of rehab and whatnot, but obviously all those people talked about she didn't care. I mean, and that goes back to our original conversation of ever since she was 9 or 10 years old, everyone told her
This is a bad guy.
not to care,
Right.
right? I mean, you initially say, well, murder's wrong no matter what, and you accept that, but when the adults and all of your surrounding environment is telling you, yeah, killing's wrong, but not him,
Right.
Right.
right? Okay, so again, there's sort of that balance of do you hold her to the same feeling of remorse,
Sure.
when that either way they did. She had to serve out her time. She is not currently in jail. Keith is. Keith's first hearing for parole will be in 2027.
Yeah.
So he is still in prison over this. And there's been a lot of talk afterwards as far as Keith's involvement. I think the end result's certainly the same, the murder of a person. But I think that if Keith, out of his revenge, anger, emotion, or whatever, would have walked over and killed Michael Fred Gloede, I mean, just like opened the door, shot him, and walked away, would be one thing. Once you involve a 15-year-old,
Yep.
you kill the dog, you burn the house, you take jewelry, you take the gun, you profit from the jewelry.
Right.
I mean, the sympathy level starts going down,
Sure.
right? I mean, on every action that you're taking that is just a calculated, premeditated, financial gain murder.
Right.
You know, and I think that's one of the big differences. I think that certainly his mom's murder played a factor, but I think that the other actions beyond that, which again may go to the fact that he didn't care, right? And I think it's appropriate by all means that in ending that we talk about some of the I'll say excuses, but some of the concerns, some of the things that the family threw out, right? So the family of Keith is throwing out that the 15-year-old is the one who really manipulated him and made him do this, right? And then you have Michael Fred's family, his daughter testifying that he was a wonderful father, that these are lies about him, and that he was just killed in cold blood murder for his joy. So certainly I don't want to dismiss their feelings, their thoughts about their family or otherwise.
Right.
Obviously, we're testifying and on stand to the facts of what we find, you
Sure.
know, and that's what we're covering today is what's in our cases and what we experienced out there. You know, the end result is that Michael Brandon is not in jail anymore. He served his time for Lori Randall. The criminal justice system decided that Michael Fred did not have enough sufficient evidence to say he was involved in that. So we have someone who took it into their own hands and obviously is now punished for that. But again, forensic-wise, investigation-wise, this was a case that touched many areas. I think it was a very interesting case, and it certainly challenged all of us to do new things like digging
Right.
in fire scenes and
And making
you
sense of
finding
it.
how to unbury a dog and everything else.
Right.
So, but I thank y'all for joining today and
Thanks
putting
for
this
having
out
us.
there.
Yeah.
And so, as always, if you enjoyed this program, you can subscribe, like, whatever you do for all of our channels that we have out there. And if you would like to be a guest, if you'd like a topic covered, you can reach out to me, Dan@crimesceneaday.com. If you would like to support any of the shows at Lone Star Radio that supports us, you can contact Dick at irlonestar.com. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.